The lights were always brighter around him than anyone else on Earth. When he stepped onto a stage, the world stopped breathing. Millions moved in rhythm with a single voice, a single glove, a single moonwalk. For decades, his music crossed borders, languages, and generations, becoming the soundtrack of childhood's first loves and unforgettable moments. But when the music faded, the silence around him was heavy. Michael Jackson was not just a global superstar. He was a mystery the world never stopped trying to solve. Behind the applause and the screaming crowds lived a man shaped by pain, pressure, and secrets few truly understood. While history remembers the king of pop for his timeless songs and record-breaking success, there is another story, one filled with unanswered questions and shadows that never fully lifted. How does a child born into poverty become the most recognizable figure on the planet? What happens when fame arrives before innocence has a chance to exist? And why did admiration slowly turn into suspicion, judgment, and relentless scrutiny? From a childhood marked by fear and discipline to an adulthood lived under a microscope. Michael Jackson's life followed a path unlike any other. His rise was unmatched. His fall was complicated, and his death left the world divided between grief, doubt, and endless debate. Some say he was misunderstood. Others believe the truth has yet to be told. More than a decade after his passing, the questions remain. And perhaps the most haunting one of all is this: did the world ever truly know Michael Jackson, or only the image it created of him? Long before stadiums filled with screaming fans, there was a small house in Gary, Indiana. The air around it carried the sound of steel mills and long shifts, a reminder of how close survival lived to exhaustion. This was where Michael Jackson was born into a working-class black family, one of 9 children, sharing limited space, limited money, and limited choices. In that home, childhood did not unfold gently. Music was not a hobby, it was an obligation. Michael's father, Joseph Jackson, believed discipline was the only way out of poverty. Rehearsals were long. Mistakes were punished. Fear became a constant presence in the room. While other children played outside, Michael memorized rhythms and harmonies, learning to perform before he fully understood what performing meant. He would later write that his childhood felt stolen. Joy came second to perfection. At just 6 years old, Michael joined his older brothers in what would become a family band. At first, they played small venues around Indiana clubs, talent shows, local gatherings. The crowds were modest, but something about the youngest child stood out. His voice carried emotion far beyond his age. His movements were natural, almost instinctive. People noticed. By the mid-1960s, the group began traveling farther Chicago, then across state lines, slowly expanding their reach. They evolved from local performers into a tightly rehearsed act driven by ambition and fear in equal measure. In 1966, the group rebranded, and Michael was no longer just the youngest brother. He was becoming the center. Everything changed when they signed with Motown Records. Motown gave them access to a national audience, but it also demanded polish. Schedules tightened, expectations grew. Michael, still not a teenager, was already working as a professional entertainer. Songs climbed the charts. Applause became routine. Yet behind the scenes, the pressure only intensified. At 14, Michael released solo recordings while still performing with his brothers. Success arrived early, but at a cost few adults could handle, let alone a child. Fame followed him everywhere, but safety did not. The world saw a smiling prodigy. What it didn't see was a boy learning to survive inside an adult industry. By the early 1970s, the family moved to California. A new house, a new state, a new level of visibility. The Jackson name was becoming a brand, and Michael Jackson was growing up in front of millions without ever being allowed to grow up at all. By the late 1970s, Michael Jackson was no longer just a former child star. He stood at a crossroads, searching for a sound that could finally separate him from the family name and redefine who he was as an artist. That turning point arrived quietly, not with noise, but with a conversation, one that would change music history. In 1978, while filming The Wiz, Michael met producer Quincy Jones. Their creative connection was immediate. Quincy saw what many had missed, not just talent, but vision. Together they began shaping a new Michael Jackson, one who would speak to the world, not just sing to it. When Off the Wall was released in 1979, the transformation was undeniable. The album blended soul funk, pop, and disco with precision and warmth. It wasn't just successful, it was respected. Critics praised it. Audiences embraced it. For the first time, Michael felt seen as an adult artist. Yet even this success was only a rehearsal. Then came Thriller. Released in 1982, Thriller did not arrive quietly. It exploded. Song after song dominated radio waves. Music videos became cinematic events. Dance moves turned into global language. Michael Jackson was no longer competing with other artists, he was competing with history. Thriller shattered records across the globe. It reached audiences beyond race, age, and nationality. In a deeply divided America, Michael became something rare, a black artist embraced by mainstream white audiences without losing the loyalty of black communities worldwide. Television networks that once hesitated now depended on his presence. The industry adjusted itself around him. But with this level of influence came relentless pressure. Every appearance mattered. Every gesture was analyzed. Fame followed him into private spaces, leaving little room to breathe. The same world that lifted him onto a throne watched him constantly, waiting for signs of weakness. Michael worked obsessively. He rehearsed longer than anyone else. He demanded perfection not just from dancers and musicians, but from himself. The stage became both sanctuary and battlefield. When he performed, he was untouchable. When the lights went out, the loneliness returned. Success brought power, but it also built walls. As his music grew larger than life, so did the expectations placed on him. The image of Michael Jackson was no longer his alone. It belonged to corporations, media, and public imagination. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, admiration began to shift into scrutiny. At the height of his fame, Michael Jackson had everything the world said mattered. Yet beneath the surface, cracks were already forming quietly, preparing the next chapter of his story. At the height of his power, the world began to look at Michael Jackson differently. Not with admiration, but with suspicion. It started quietly. A change in appearance, a lighter complexion, a face that no longer resembled the child the public thought it knew. Each new photograph triggered headlines. Each public appearance fueled speculation. The conversation shifted from music to skin, from art to anatomy. Michael did not run from the questions. He addressed them. He explained that he suffered from vitiligo, a condition that destroys skin pigment along with lupus and autoimmune disease that caused chronic pain and fatigue. To manage uneven patches of skin, he used makeup and medical treatments. But explanations rarely silence a world hungry for scandal. For many, especially within the Black American community, the issue cut deeper. Some felt betrayed. Others felt confused. In a society already shaped by racial trauma, Michael's changing appearance became a symbol people projected their fears onto. The media amplified the tension, often without restraint. In February 1993, Michael sat down with Oprah Winfrey. It was one of the most watched interviews in television history. Calm but visibly wounded, he spoke about his illness and the pain of being misunderstood. He denied hating himself. He denied wanting to be someone else. What he admitted was far simpler and far sadder. He was exhausted. As the scrutiny intensified, Michael withdrew. He surrounded himself with controlled environments, places where he felt safe from judgment. Neverland was born from that desire, not as an escape from adulthood, but from the cruelty he felt the world imposed on him. Then came the allegations. In 1993, accusations of child sexual abuse shattered his carefully guarded isolation. The investigation dominated headlines. Police searched his home. His name became synonymous with scandal. Although the case ended without criminal charges, the damage was irreversible. Trust evaporated. The court of public opinion had already reached its verdict. Michael's health deteriorated. Stress took hold. Sleep became elusive. Medication entered his daily life not as indulgence, but as survival. A decade later, new accusations surfaced. Another trial, another wave of cameras, another public dissection of his private life. In 2005, he was acquitted on all charges, legally cleared but emotionally drained. When the verdict was read, Michael smiled, but the man who left the courthouse was not the same one who entered. The stage still called to him. Music still lived in his bones, but the world he once ruled now felt hostile. And beneath the surface, the weight of years of judgment, fear, and loneliness was beginning to crush him. In the United States, Michael Jackson was never judged quietly. Every accusation, every rumor, every headline became a national conversation. Talk shows debated him. News networks dissected his life frame by frame. Late-night comedians turned his pain into punchlines. America did not simply watch Michael Jackson, it put him on trial in real time. For many Americans, the question was deeply uncomfortable. How do you reconcile a man who created joy for millions with allegations that felt impossible to ignore? How do you separate art from accusation when the artist's life is unfolding on every screen? The country split into camps. Some defended him fiercely, pointing to court verdicts and the lack of physical evidence. Others argued that legal innocence did not always equal moral truth. Advocacy groups for children demanded to be heard. Fans demanded fairness. And in between stood a public unsure of what to believe. Outside the United States, the reaction was different, but no less intense. In Europe, Latin America, Africa, and parts of Asia, Michael Jackson remained a near mythical figure. His concerts were remembered as historic moments. His music still played at weddings, funerals, and celebrations. Many international fans viewed the American media as cruel, even predatory, convinced that the same country that built him up had decided to tear him down. To them, Michael Jackson represented something larger than scandal. He was proof that a black artist could dominate a global stage. He was a symbol of unity in places where race, language, and borders mattered far less than melody and movement. Then in 2019, Leaving Neverland reopened wounds the world thought had scarred over. The documentary did not introduce new evidence, but it introduced new emotion. Graphic testimonies, detailed memories, pain revisited years later. In America, the film reignited debate with renewed intensity. Radio stations removed songs, statues were questioned, legacies were reassessed. Globally, reactions varied. Some countries followed America's lead. Others rejected the film outright, calling it one-sided and opportunistic. Once again, Michael Jackson stood at the center of a moral storm without the ability to speak for himself. What remained constant was the division. Even decades after his rise and years after his death, Michael Jackson continued to force the world to confront its contradictions. Justice versus belief, evidence versus emotion, art versus the artist. And perhaps that is why his story refuses to fade. Because it was never just about him. It was about how societies choose who they protect and who they abandon. On June 25, 2009, the music stopped. Michael Jackson was found unresponsive in his home, a place meant to shelter him from the outside world. Within hours, the news spread faster than any song he had ever released. Fans gathered in silence. Radios replayed familiar melodies. Candlelight replaced applause. A global era ended in a single afternoon. The official cause was acute propofol intoxication. The responsibility fell on his personal physician, Conrad Murray, later convicted of involuntary manslaughter. The court ruled that Michael Jackson did not die by chance. He died because trust was misplaced, because medical boundaries were crossed, because exhaustion had gone too far. But for many, the verdict did not bring closure. Michael Jackson left behind more than music. He left behind contradictions. A man who built joy, yet lived in fear. A performer who unified millions yet remained profoundly alone. A legacy celebrated on stages while debated in courtrooms and documentaries. Today, his songs still play. Children still learn his dances. Artists still study his work. The sound of his voice continues to travel across generations that never saw him live. In that sense, Michael Jackson never left. And yet his name still carries weight. Some remember him as a victim of fame and a system that devours its brightest stars. Others remain haunted by unanswered allegations, convinced that time has protected truths we may never fully know. Between those positions lies a silence, one that Michael himself can no longer fill. Perhaps that is the true legacy. Not perfection, not innocence, but complexity. Michael Jackson forces us to sit with discomfort. to accept that human beings can create beauty while carrying deep wounds. That history does not always offer clean endings, that some stories live on without resolution. And so the question remains not just about Michael Jackson, but about us. How do we remember those who shaped our lives even when their stories are painful? Do we listen only to the music or also to the silence between the notes? If this story made you reflect, share your thoughts below. Did Michael Jackson mean something personal to you? Do you believe the world ever gave him a fair chance to be human? Thank you for staying until the end. Some legends fade, others echo. Michael Jackson still echoes. To ensure you don't miss any of our latest updates or valuable insights, please like this video and subscribe. Your support is our greatest motivation. Thank you.